Okay, we're going to unpack this a little bit. I've seen a couple people who have been writing about this concept that I introduced a few days ago called WEI. But we are going to talk about the distinctions between WEI, which is white, entitled, and incompetent, or white, entitled, and inept, or white, entitled, and ineptly incompetent, however you want to put it. But I want to talk about this as a comparison point to DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, I don't want to hear, let me just say at the outset, I don't want to hear not near another word about meritocracy. Not near another word about meritocracy. I got wind of some of the additional appointments that Donald Trump is making through his for his cabinet, and I don't want to hear not a single solitary person tell me anything else about meritocracy, because meritocracy, it's a lie. It is an absolute and complete lie. And I want to break this down a little bit. And I want us to stop using DEI to describe mediocre white people getting access to positions. And I know this is going to step on some toes, but that's what we do here to the Lurie Daniel Favors Show. Let's go back to this notion about DEI again. We only have DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. We only have affirmative action programs because white Americans, European Americans, were so committed to the lies that they had told themselves for centuries, whether it was the thinkers and the planners of society, the social architects of that day, or whether it was the little stories that they would whisper to themselves at night as they were putting their children to sleep. For those who did put their own children to sleep, because many of them had enslaved Africans putting their children to sleep. But these are the lies that they told themselves about white supremacy. And these lies were so ingrained in the white consciousness that essentially it didn't matter how qualified you might have been as a non-white person. You were going to not get an opportunity. You were going to not get the ability to compete. You were going to be excluded from competition because white Americans created a system where only white people got to compete. Which means that by virtue of that fact, you're limiting yourself against the competition. So all the people who might be better than you, you will never even know about because they're not even allowed to play in your game. And then you call that you call it meritocracy, the ability to be in the game, the ability to be in that space. White Americans told themselves that only white people can be here because they're the only ones that deserve to be here because they meritoriously deserve it. Now, based on what? The lies they told themselves, white supremacy, racism, there's no logic to it. It's basically a group of people got together and told themselves things that they decided were true simply because they said so. And so we got affirmative action as a policy that was introduced not as legislation. Right. This was not legislation. It didn't even pass. It didn't pass a vote in Congress. It was policy that came out in an executive order. And that executive order basically said, listen, we can't be as racist as we have been. It's bad for American business. It's bad for us on the international stage. We, the government, right? It was a governmental policy. When it comes to hiring, we should consider people beyond race. Right? We should consider people who are not white. We should take affirmative action to hire people or to at least interview people just to see maybe there's a black out there who can compete with we the whites. Just maybe. And they had to do that because it didn't matter how many laws they put into place. It didn't matter how much discussion they had about how fundamentally flawed their analysis of their own power and potential was. It didn't matter. White people were wholesale committed to embodying, embracing, and promulgating racism and white supremacist ideology. And so there had to be something that disrupted that. And that was called the affirmative action policy. And then it was followed by diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. And these policies, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and affirmative action, they were put into place as like a hack around the racism, because there was no other way to get white people to agree to stop being racist. They had to mandate these things because white Americans were so committed to their white supremacist reality. And one of the arguments that they say when they are resisting diversity, equity, inclusion, when they are resisting affirmative action is that we need a meritocracy. We, the whites, believe in merit, and you only get to compete if you're competing based on merit. And if you don't compete based on merit, then you're just not qualified. Now, there are your N-word. And that's sort of how they have approached the world. They refuse to engage. And I don't mean all, but the righteous whites are there. But righteous whites, y'all got to do more because your people is running amok. They're running amok. And so one of the primary arguments we hear against diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the primary arguments that we hear against affirmative action is this idea about meritocracy. And the presumption is that if you are a diversity, equity, and inclusion hire, you are by default less qualified because in the sickness that is white supremacy, and it is a sickness, It's a sickness to believe that you're better than everybody else simply because you said so. There's something fundamentally wrong with the thinking process there. But if essentially it makes sense to the white supremacists that Black people and other non-white people would be inherently unqualified because that sickness told them that only white people matter. And a part of white supremacy is this idea that Blackness is inherently inferior. And so by default, less capable. But here on the Lurie Daniel Favors Show, you all know, if you've been rocking with me for a little while, we do a variety types of math. We do a lot of math. And one of the types of math we do is called diversity math, because we got to be smarter than everybody else, because that's just how you navigate the world. When you're told you're nothing, you have to show to yourself mainly, but you would demonstrate that you are something by going to extreme lengths. And so one of the extreme lengths we as Black people have had to navigate has been understanding diversity math. I'm going to explain it to you. We've talked about this before. Diversity math says this: we, Black people, people who are excluded from being able to even get a chance at participating, and quite frankly, really, white people, if you were so superior, why not compete and prove it? Right? Like, if you were so superior, if whiteness was so inherently superior, why would you need to exclude everybody else from competing? You should be able to compete and win all the time if you really believed you were superior. If you really believed that there was logic behind what you were saying, there would be no reason to exclude other people from participating, because your superiority would allow them to participate and then lose all the time. And then there wouldn't be a question. There wouldn't be a question. Well, there ain't no question for us. But let's get back to this diversity math. Diversity math says that we, Black people, have to be twice as good as white people in order to go half as far as white people go. We Black people, so if the destination is a job, we Black people, according to diversity math, we have to be twice as good as you just to get halfway to the job. So diversity math would suggest that by the time we get to the job, we're 4 times better than you. Because if we're twice as good at the halfway point, by the time we reach the end goal, that's 4 times better. 2 times. 2 times 2 is 4. And so, and when you think about it, I met a sister the other day at an event for Black women executive directors. And she made a comment that just, it has blessed my heart ever since I first heard it. She basically said, I had to tell my board that at the table, she's like, I'm better than all of you at this table. I'm more qualified than you. I've got more education than you. I've got more experience than you. She's like the Ketanji Brown Jackson of the Supreme Court in her nonprofit organization. And so she said, basically, she had to tell the board, I am more qualified and more capable than all of you, because not only did I have to get all of your credentials and then way more than any of you could bring to the table, I also had to survive you. I had to navigate you and the prejudices that you embrace. I had to train harder than you. I had to master harder than you. And I had to master how to navigate you and all of the obstacles that you and your ancestors put into place and continue to benefit from. Let's get back to diversity math, which means, again, as I said, by the time we get to the table that we all trying to get to, if you didn't have to go through any of the obstacles that you set up for me to go to, baby, I'm better than you. And I know it sounds like I'm being braggadocious, and I am, because that's how these things work. When you create a system where people can only get into the system by, one, getting all the base level requirements that you did and overcoming the obstacles that you put into place, baby, is there really any question about this? Like, let's take it. Come on. Anyway, let's get back to why I'm so frustrated about this particular moment. So diversity math really only talks about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's only part of the issue, because what we really have to understand is that DEI math, diversity math, is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is WEI. It addresses this idea that white people have some other calculations that they have to engage in, because the only thing that you need in order to prove you're better than a Black person or better than somebody who's not white is to be white, to have a sense of entitlement, and to be inept is sort of baked in and accepted. And we understand that's the case because again, the system you set up, or your ancestors that you benefit from, even the righteous whites, it essentially says we're only going to compete with other people that we like. We're not going to engage in actual competition. And so WEI and DEI sort of sit at these opposite or on 2 sides of this coin of trying to figure out how to crack this nut. So last night, I'm reading the news, not watching. I'm reading the news, and I'm seeing information about some of the latest appointees that Donald Trump is making to his future cabinet. We've got brilliant candidates, and I'm saying brilliant in all the air quotes, like Kimberly Guilfoyle. Kimberly Guilfoyle, who used to date Gavin Newsom, who now most recently has been dating Donald Trump Jr. Yesterday, or over the past couple of days, there were news reports of Donald Trump Jr. apparently and Kimberly Guilfoyle having broken up. And Donald Trump Jr. is out seen gallivanting around. I don't know what the condition of his stability is, but he was out seen gallivanting around with another woman holding hands. And so what we find out is at the same time that Kimberly Guilfoyle and Donald Trump Jr. have parted ways, Donald Trump Sr. has appointed Kimberly Guilfoyle, is appointing her to be the U.S. ambassador to Greece. Now, what qualifications does she have in foreign affairs? She ain't got none, but she's white. They are entitled, and she is inept. And then we've got Tillman Fertitta, who is the owner of the NBA's Houston Rockets, own a basketball team. Now, I'm sure you good for something. You own a basketball team. So obviously you know how to manage money. But that person is now being nominated as the ambassador to Italy. What do they know about being ambassador to any of these places? One of them owns the basketball team, and like that's it. And like other businesses. And Kimberly Guilfoyle used to sleep with the president's son. This is WEI, white, entitled, and incompetent. And neither of these people have experience with any of the issues that they're going to be grappling with in foreign affairs. A black could never. A black could never. But then we've got other examples, which we've talked about at length. We've got Matt, young girl loving Gates, as Dr. Carr calls him, which I think is a wonderful name, who, after practicing law for like a year or two, maybe 3, goes into government and has been a congressman who has passed very little legislation, has got very few accomplishments under his legislative belt. And they put that man up, who probably couldn't even tell you how to get to the courthouse or the distinction between civil and criminal law on a good day, couldn't manage the rules of evidence on a bad day. Put that man up to be in charge of the entire Justice Department for the nation. What qualifications does he have? He is white. He is entitled. He is utterly incompetent, and he likes loving young girls. Maybe, we don't know, because the ethics committee that had a whole ass investigative report on his young girl loving activities and the fact that there are allegations that he was paying for sex with young girls, underage girls. They are about to release the report. And then the white entitlement and inept caucus comes into play. And they're like, well, we're not going to release the report. Matt Gaetz quits his job as a congressman 2 days before the report's supposed to come out. And he is put up as the future head of the Department of Justice. And he withdrew his own nomination. So that's why we're not navigating him. We got Pete, what is his name? Pete Hegseth, or as I like to call him, Pete, your own mama knows your trash Hegseth, who yes, served in the military and has been a Fox News host for years. And after he served in the military, he came back here and advocated for pardons for other soldiers who have been convicted of committing war crimes. What qualifications does he have to be in charge of the Department of Defense? We got Linda McMahon, who has led the WWE to fictional warrior greatness. Fictional war, they don't. It's not even real warriorship. It's not real gladiator. It's plays. She does skits. Linda McMahon has made a lot of money creating skits and apparently facing charges of enabling the sexual assault of young people in her industry. They put her up to lead the Department of Education. What qualifications does she have other than being white and entitled and incompetent? There is a distinction between DEI hires and white and WEI hires, and we just need to know that. And then Robert F. Kennedy. I saw a news clip last night of some of the things that Robert F. Kennedy is asking potential employees for the Department of Health and Human Services to do if they want to be considered. And he's got this test that he wants people to take to determine if they are merit to be a part of the Department of Health and Human Services. And he asks these people questions. And I actually signed up for the test. I'm in the process of taking the test. It takes about 90 minutes. But I wanted to see what some of these questions are. This is Robert F. Kennedy, whose qualifications include being an environmental attorney. He is an anti-vaccines, so get your vaccines before the 20th. And he has survived having a worm eat part of his brain and die and just sit there. He's a brain worm eating survivor. I don't know. He also is the same one who picked up a dead baby bear and thought he was going to drive around and drive it home and then eat the dead baby bear. But then he forgot about the baby bear because he had all these meetings he had to get to. And then he had a steakhouse dinner scheduled at Peter Luger's that night. And so he was like, oh, I got this dead ass baby bear in my car. I'm going to just drop it off in Central Park and pretend that a biker hit it. And then this is the same RFK who heard that there was a dead whale that had beached. So he went down to the beach and chopped off the dead whale's head, and then straps it to the top of his car, gives his kids some plastic bags to throw on their head so that the whale juices don't fall down into their face. I have so many questions. What qualifications does he have to lead Health and Human Services, other than the fact that he is promoting raw milk, which is now killing folks, or at least causing severe injury, as we learned from Dr. Andrea Love yesterday? He has a screening process to determine the merit of people who want to apply to work at the Department of Health and Human Services. And his screening process includes, like there's a puzzle you got to complete, there's a synonym test, but then they ask questions like, do I make people feel at ease more than I spend time reflecting on things? Do I feel like I neglect my duties more than either of these strengths? What the hell kind of a question is that? It's like a compound question. It's like 3 different segments in that thing. Maybe it's yes to one and no to the other 2, but what kind of question is that? The questions ask you to rate. Do I require excessive admiration, or do I not have much interest in having sexual experiences with other people? What does that have to do with the Department of Health and Human Services? There's one option that says, I believe in many things others don't, like having a sixth sense, clairvoyance, and telepathy. And because this is a same question, as an adolescent, I had bizarre fantasies or preoccupations. What the fuck? What is happening? In the personality traits section of the RFK questions, they ask you if you believe certain things, like, do you believe that too much tax money goes to support artists, which is something that the Heritage Foundation is very much against? Do you like poetry? Do you try to avoid complex people? These are the questions they are asking to find out if you are going to be a good fit for the Department of Health and Human Services. I don't want to hear another freaking word about meritocracy. I don't want to hear anything about whether or not a diversity, equity, and inclusion hire is the right thing, the wrong thing. I don't want to hear it, because it's all lies. They lie. They lie to themselves about the value of white supremacy. They lie to themselves about the value of white people. They lie to themselves about the lack of value that other people have. They lie. They build economic systems around the lie. They take the lie and they create criminal procedural laws around the lie. They tell themselves lies, like somebody homeless on a subway who's dancing and not causing a physical harm to someone else. Yes, probably making you uncomfortable. They lie about the fact that you have to kill that person. They lie all the time. And I am sick of having this idea that diversity, equity, and inclusion is somehow a problem when we got WEI hires running a freaking muck in the government. They're white, they are entitled, and they are ineptly incompetent. And I need us to stop using DEI hire to talk about them. That is not what a DEI hire is. Diversity, equity, and inclusion was a hack to get white people to stop being racist for just a little bit of time, so that the overly qualified Black people against whom they were afraid to compete, because you know damn well if you was really superior, you would not have to exclude us. You would just win all the time. But you don't, and you can't, because we, as a function of the systems your ancestors put in place, which you still get to benefit from, have always had to be better, smarter, quicker than you, just to survive the lies that you tell yourselves. I don't know what we are to do with this. I don't know where we're going. I just know I need us to introduce this terminology, WEI, take it, run with it. When you see somebody getting ahead and you know they ain't shit, or you know they ain't did nothing, they ain't accomplished nothing, that's a WEI hire. They're white, they're titled, and they're incompetent. Most of you work for people who you had to train, who then became your bosses. And you know damn well they are simply white and entitled and largely incompetent. Now, is this everybody? No, of course not. But the righteous out there, those of you who are not a part of this mindset, you've got to do more. You have to do more, because your people are ruining everything, including the international standing of this nation, including the ability to be taken seriously. And quite frankly, I have to appreciate that the gloves are off. I have to appreciate that we are now able to have these sorts of conversations, because I think a part of our ancestors' wildest dreams was being able to speak truth to power openly, honestly, and say the things that need to be said. They're not DEI hires, folks. They're white, entitled, and incompetent. And apparently, according to the next leader of the quote unquote free world, that's all that matters. We got to go to commercial break. 866-801-8255, 866-801-TALK is the number. Thanks to those of you who participated in our YouTube live. We might do some more of these a little more frequently. We got to go to commercial break. Much more to come here on the Lurie Daniel Favors Show. We'll be right back. Oh, and the sweater I'm wearing, for those of you who asked, you can get it at LurieDanielFavors.com, where the Moment of Gratitude merch is located. And yeah, grab a mug while you're at it. We got to go to commercial break. We'll be right back after this.